So many friendly names and faces just coming in. And thank you so much to my colleague Madison, who's running the back end and just keeps feeding people in. So as you're still trickling in, hello, welcome, hello. And thank you for joining us at our first campaign briefing for the Begins with Home campaign. We're really excited to have you here in this campaign briefing space, which is designed for our Shift the Bay narrative partners and allies, both those that are new to the space and long tenured, have been with us through the long haul. It's a space to be part of the Begins with Home campaign efforts, joining with a diverse coalition of partners to advance coordinated messages and tactics to combat the harmful narratives that we're seeing out in the field and seed new helpful ones that are going to make progress for our movement. It's our hope that in these spaces, the briefings are going to be a source of narrative expertise and collective learning for and from our partners and allies, surfacing important strategy, research questions in and from the field. It's also our hope that this space is going to allow us to offer important feedback loops, including understanding what your work and current narrative needs are, sharing concrete ways we believe the Begins with Home campaign can help your work, and identifying opportunities for collaboration. And of course, it's also where we're going to be sharing new insight from research and specific plans for the campaign moments. That means at some moments in these campaign briefing spaces, we'll be brainstorming together or collecting feedback on what would help make this campaign and our narrative strategy more relevant and useful for your work. And at other moments, we're going to be more in information sharing mode. Through it all, though, I hope these spaces make clear that the Begins with Home narrative campaign is for all of us and needs all of us. It's not just a slogan, it is our truth that a thriving Bay Area begins with home, and that the Begins with Home campaign begins with you. So allow me just to start by thanking you for being here today, and thank you in advance for being part of this work ahead. We can move to the next slide. We've got our agenda for the day, what we're running through. That was sort of my preamble to what our hopes for this space will look like over the year. But now let's talk about what our hopes for this space actually today. Our first look into the Begins with Home campaign for our Shift the Bay network. I'm somewhere in between welcome and introduction right now, I think. Welcome. So happy to have you here, the folks that are still trickling in. Shortly, you're going to be hearing from Emily Goodman from EMC Research about our most recent voter survey, and then that will be followed by an overview of the Begins with Home campaign strategy from NPH's lead narrative strategist, Corey Fisher. After that, we'll review ways you and your organization can get involved with the campaign over the next year or so and learn what to expect in coming months. Please note that the chat box is open throughout the hour, and we'll be pulling from the chat box questions first when we get to the Q&A section that follows the research strategy and timeline overview, as well as taking live questions when we're officially in the QA section. In our closing here, we'll be sharing our process for you to submit additional feedback and requests for future briefings. So if you can stay with us through the whole hour, please hang tight and we'll be able to share a little bit more about that process with you. Moving to the next slide, please. So what is Begins with Home? That's what you hear about. The Begins with Home campaign is our answer to a question of how do we inspire Bay Area residents to believe that change is possible for housing justice, and not just to believe, but to believe in a way that encourages them to take action and lays the groundwork for future milestone reforms. What you see here on the screen is our answer to that question. We believe that if we show hundreds of thousands of people in the Bay Area that when it comes to building a future of housing justice, hope is possible and that they have the power to make change happen by working together, this is how we're going to open up and change the political winds that we are all operating within. Our next slide, please. Oh, there it is. So we have been doing this work for some time. We've been building out our Bay Area collaborative narrative strategy for a number of years. And actually, I'd love to just get a sense of from the folks here. I recognize some of you, but maybe raise your hand or do a little like me in the chat box. Who has been part of Shift the Bay in the past? The research, the programming, events, workshops, table. Love to give you a shout out and appreciate you and see you there. Seeing some thumbs, seeing some hands. Some hearts. Whoever's clapping, I hope you're clapping for yourself too. But thank you. It's great to have you all here, our long tenured partners. Really every step along the way has been shaped, informed, and refined based on the work that we've all been doing collectively, your feedback, your findings, your share outs alongside it. I'm going to let those hands go down and now ask, so who's new to this? You can raise your hand in the chat box or introduce yourself in the chat box. All right, maybe fewer of those folks, or maybe just a little less shy about putting the hands up, but it's great to have you here. Welcome, especially to folks for whom this might be your first introduction to Shift the Bay. And just to reassure you, we kind of all are. There's a little bit of a reset here. So the folks who have been with us along the way have helped shape us up to this place, but we're moving into a new phase of partnership. So we're really all going to be learning and building this together. So rest assured that if you're new to this, you're here at the exact right time and space. I'm going to take us on just a quick walk down memory lane to ground us in where we are and where we're headed, or how we got here. About 5 years ago, NPH began convening organizations working across the affordable housing movement to try to figure out, like, how do we bring research-driven messaging and narrative strategies in a way that's going to build power for housing and racial justice. We were working in deep collaboration with a diverse range of organizations from all over the Bay Area. These organizations spanned different industries, different issue priorities, certainly different audiences. We wanted a really broad sense of understanding about what it was looking like around the Bay Area so that we could build out our research program and then turn that into actionable narrative strategies, messages, and recommendations. We launched what became known as Shift the Bay, our coalition and capacity building initiative designed to share out our learnings, help us all strengthen our skills, provide direct TA, and be really responsive to the field's need to prime us to be more effective together. Then we began experimenting with localized campaigns for housing justice, creative partnerships, and developing new targeted resources. In that time, we reached new voters, we amplified shared values and messages, and we learned a lot. And that is what positioned us to where we are now, bringing it all together in a centralized, coordinated regional narrative campaign that's going to allow us to scale our reach and deepen our impact. And that, of course, is what we're here for today. So let's get into it. I am delighted to introduce Emily Goodman from EMC Research, who can ground our campaign strategy with some new key findings from our latest research. Over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Alina, and hi, everyone. Nice to be with you and present the results of what has become an annual research survey. It's my favorite time of year to get into the field and see how voters in the Bay Area are feeling about housing attitudes, and then report out to you all fine people. So next slide, please. A quick note on methodology to remind us all what and when we did this. So back in September to early October of this year, we conducted a survey of 1,500 voters in the Bay Area. This is the fourth time that we have done this, looking back to 2020, 2021, and 2022. And we offer the survey in English, Spanish, and Chinese. When we're showing the overall data, the margin of error on it is about plus or minus just over 2 percentage points. This is reflective of the 9-county Bay Area electorate. We conduct this survey fully online, in part so we can do some kind of creative things with how we ask voters about their attitudes toward housing. So we're going to cover kind of the highlights today, but you'll have additional access to more data on the Shift the Bay website, which we'll link you to later in this presentation. So a few kind of big picture things. First, on the overall mood. I'm sure for those of you who have seen some recent polling, you may sense it when you're out and about, that the electorate right now is feeling pretty pessimistic about the way that things are going. We see that concern about housing affordability and homelessness continue to be high concerns for voters, but also we're now seeing a pretty sharp increase in kind of the top of mind concern about crime. When we ask voters how they perceive the difficulty of finding housing or how their personal housing situation, we see very consistent numbers with what we have seen in past years, and we'll show you that data. Next slide, please. This was an exciting year because we were able to establish some benchmark questions around housing attitudes that can help inform the Begins with Home campaign. So what we found in this kind of question set is that we see voters lack optimism and hope around the future of housing affordability and homelessness in the Bay Area. But when we ask, but is there still time to make a difference? Can we still do something meaningful on housing affordability and homelessness? people say, yes, it's not too late. So therein lies the Begins with Home campaign. And we're excited to kind of test some messages and report out on how this campaign can really tap into what feels like dwindling optimism, but it's not too late, on how we can get folks excited. They don't really know what to do personally, and that's kind of where the campaign steps in. Thanks, Madison. And then we did have our kind of handful of housing value frames where voters were kind of presented with two very different contrasting statements. Housing is a human right versus housing is a privilege. And we asked voters, kind of as we have in the last few years, where they place themselves on a variety of scales. And the kind of upshot is that there has been very little change, as in less than an overall average point of 1 since the past research that we have done. So housing values remain incredibly consistent. We know this. It's very hard to change attitudes, but it's also incredibly helpful for us to understand kind of where the electorate is on these, so we can, try to meet people where they are. All right. Getting into a few of the overall numbers here. As I mentioned, folks are feeling pretty pessimistic about the direction of the Bay Area today. 29% say that things are headed in the right direction, compared to almost 60%, 59% of voters saying that things are headed down the wrong track or off in the wrong direction. This has been a steady increase over the last 5 years or so, with kind of a blip during the COVID time when we were flattening the curve. Next slide. We have an open-ended question where we say, what's the most important problems? What are the most important problems facing the Bay Area? We see homelessness, housing affordability, housing crisis continue to be very top of mind concern for voters. Those are showing the tracking data here. The dark red is the current survey. The lighter red, as you go, is kind of past research, drawing your attention to that kind of third set of bars in where it looks like a staircase. This is top of mind perception and problems, volunteered concern about crime, safety, public drug use, things like that, where now 55% of voters are mentioning something about crime or public safety when we ask what are the most important problems facing the Bay Area today. Next slide. So on the ease of finding housing, so this is a question we've also asked over the last few years. Compared to a year ago, is it easier or harder to find a place to live? We see a little bit of a decrease in the percent of voters who are saying that it's harder to find a place to live, but it's not that it's gotten easier. The perception isn't that it's gotten easier. There's just more voters who now are saying it's about the same level of difficulty as it was compared to a year ago. Next slide. So looking at some of our Begins with Home questions, these were we wanted to understand where the electorate was just in terms of their kind of overall awareness of what is out there in terms of what they're hearing on housing affordability and homelessness. So when we ask voters, have you heard or seen anything recently about the future of housing affordability in the Bay Area? 62% of voters say that they have seen or heard at least a little bit. So of those people, of that 62% of the electorate who say that they can recall seeing or hearing some kind of information about housing affordability, 64% of those people say that what they recall is actually negative information. So that's the bars on the bottom there. 36%, say that what they recall seeing or hearing has been positive. So, okay, go ahead. That's good. We should continue. So when we ask some kind of specific agree, disagree questions around, can we still make a difference, which is what you're seeing here, we see that most voters still agree that it's possible to make a meaningful difference to address homelessness and housing affordability in the Bay Area. So looking at these top two bars here, almost 3/4, at least 2/3 of voters agree that it's possible to make a difference. When we ask about hopefulness specifically, which is the bottom bar, we see less agreement with that, meaning voters are feeling less hopeful, but that it's not too late to make a difference. Next slide. And then asking specifically, what can you do or what have you done? We see a lot more voters kind of reporting that they're unsure. So we say, I have taken action to help support housing affordability in my community. 47% of voters say they disagree with that. They have not taken action to help support housing affordability in their community. Another quarter aren't really sure if they have. So all of these questions on this slide really tell us voters are feeling uncertain or unclear about their personal role in addressing housing affordability and homelessness in the Bay Area. Next slide. And then hypothetically, when we see, among those who report seeing positive information or recalling positive information about housing affordability in the Bay Area, they are more likely to support a potential bond measure. We know that this is exciting information for us because as we look ahead to next year and the possibilities of what's ahead electorally, it's exciting that if voters can see or recall positive information about this issue, they're more likely to support a housing bond. Among those who recall negative information, they're less supportive. So this just tells us when the mood is good, we have hope that voters are going to respond positively to potential bond efforts. And then just a last handful of slides here on the value frames. You can go to the next slide. And then again, thank you. So what we're showing you here is kind of each bar is representing the question that we asked. So just taking, for example, this first one, especially if you go and look at these in more detail later, having a decent place to live is a privilege, not a right, compared to having a decent place to live is a basic human right. That was presented to respondents without a number assigned, a scale, and they could essentially put a little slider ticker thing anywhere on kind of one side of that question or the other. So where do you place yourself? And then after in our analysis, we assigned a numeric value, and what you're seeing here is the mean score. So the higher the score, meaning the higher you are to 100, kind of the more progressive housing stance. So in this case, in the current poll, we see a mean score on this top question of just under 68, meaning more about 68 are putting themselves on that having a decent place to live is a basic human right. You can see as you go through the lighter blue bars, that this where voters are placing themselves on that scale has changed very little over the last 4 years. In fact, when we look at the total average shift in all of these questions, it's about 1 point, just over 1 point. So we're seeing very little movement on any of these housing value statements. Next slide. This is true really for all of them with one exception, and that is the one that's in the middle here. The Bay Area is too crowded. There's not enough space for people to continue to move here, versus there is enough space in the Bay Area for everyone who wants to live here. This has not been a drastic change, but over time, we have seen the average mean score go from a 41 back in 2020 to the Bay Area is too crowded to now it's kind of right in the middle at a mean score of 50, that there is enough space. So voters are certainly divided right down the middle, but we've seen some slight shift on that question. Really is the only one we've seen kind of statistically significant difference over the last 4 years. Next slide. And then using kind of the attitudinal questions that we've asked in the survey, we've created a couple of target audiences that we're sort of identifying as our champions in this campaign and our persuadable audiences. So I won't read every number here on this slide, but essentially the electorate has about 17% of what we are identifying as champions. And these are folks who are a little bit more in agreement that there's still time to make meaningful difference on addressing homelessness and housing affordability in the Bay Area. They're extremely concerned about housing for vulnerable populations. They're less concerned about their own personal housing situation. When we ask about messages, they find the messages in support of this campaign to be very compelling. And then our other target is the persuadable audience, and that's on the next slide, which makes up about a quarter of the electorate, 23%. And these folks are still in agreement that there is time to make meaningful difference, but we just see with less intensity because they are persuadable. And that's based on, their attitudes. And they are extremely concerned about housing for vulnerable populations. They're also kind of moderately concerned about housing for themselves and find the messaging that we shared to be convincing. So just a couple wrap-up things. I think actually we can skip these. It's essentially telling us that champions are champions and persuadables are persuadables. And then we'll have some time in the Q&A, and then of course you'll have an opportunity to see these slides in more detail. But to wrap up, voter mood continues to be very low. We are seeing an increase in top of mind concern about crime. We see that values around housing are incredibly consistent, both in terms of where people are placing themselves on those, value scales, and also how they self-report their own housing security. When we look at voters who can recall seeing positive information, they are more likely to support a housing bond than voters who recall negative information or feeling less hopeful. And then we really see an exciting opportunity for the Begins with Home campaign to, kind of capitalize on that optimism or dwindling optimism around, voters feeling that it's not too late to make a difference to address these incredibly important issues facing the Bay Area. So sorry that was a little fast, but hopefully time to answer questions in a little bit. Back to you. Oh yeah, and also, if not now, later today or tomorrow, you'll see the complete deck that I shared along with some other slides that I didn't share, but just with more data for those of you who like to digest that way, available at shiftthebay.org. Corey.
Thanks, Emily. One of the incredible things we get to build this campaign on are these years of research that many of you have been tracking along with us. All the foundation of all of the research that we just reviewed, the narrative strategy Shift the Bay has developed alongside many of you, and just the collective wisdom from all the work we're doing in this space together. That's what we're building on now. I want to dive into the strategy of how we're going to take everything we know and use that to build political will for transformative housing solutions. Before we go into this section, just a reminder, if you have any questions or questions come up, you can drop them in the chat as we go, and we will save them for the Q&A section. But let's start on the next slide. We're gonna watch the launch video that we created for Begins with Home.
We are your neighbors.
From every corner of the Bay Area.
From Oakland.
From Santa Clara County.
From San Francisco.
The North Bay.
From Fremont.
We are from every corner of the Bay Area.
We're advocates.
We're renters
and landlords.
We're homeowners
and people experiencing homelessness.
We're coming together to make the Bay a place where everyone can afford to live.
No matter what we look like,
how much we earn,
or where you lay your head down at night.
Where our children can stay in the communities where they were raised.
Where I can afford to live close to where I work.
Where nobody has to choose between paying rent and buying food.
My vision for the Bay Area is a place where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring.
We want to see a future where homeowners could support the creation of affordable housing in their own community.
We want to see a future where everyone who lives in the Bay can stay in the Bay.
We want to see a future where we invest in what it takes to make this place work.
A place where people come to make their dreams come true.
To make the Bay Area a place where we have the courage to right the wrongs of the past.
Decades of bad policy and inaction have led to a status quo that only benefits a few of us.
For too long, we've accepted a Bay Area where too many of our neighbors are priced out,
pushed out,
or left behind.
And we're done allowing hopelessness and cynicism to block our progress.
It's time to act.
It's time to act.
It's time to act.
Our story begins with home.
Community begins with home. Equity begins with home.
Understanding begins with home.
Opportunity begins with home.
Belonging begins with home.
An affordable Bay Area begins with home.
La justicia empieza en casa.
Everything that matters begins with home.
Our future begins with us.
And a thriving Bay Area begins with home.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
We go to the side. Yeah. Maybe I don't even know, why do we have more slides? I think that video actually really encapsulates the strategy of the campaign, but going a layer deeper into it. This is just as a reminder, this is the wheel just showing like all the range of emotions that we have, and putting up here just to remember that like this key thing about narrative strategy is that people don't necessarily act or make decisions based on data. You know, we have a lot of things we want people to know, but people make decisions based on how they feel. And a lot of how we've designed this campaign is to change how people feel, because right now, folks in the Bay Area, a lot of folks in the Bay Area are hearing about doom. They're feeling very doomy these days, and we need to change how people feel so we can change how they act. Let's go to the next slide. I don't think this is new for anyone here. When we start to get into the details of how are we going to help change how people feel, we have to start by changing what people are seeing. All of our research shows us this reality, right? And we know this from our work, that the problems in our space, the problems of housing, affordability, housing insecurity, homelessness, these are highly visible problems. And highly visible problems for folks in their day-to-day lives. But too often our solutions and the progress we're making as a movement are invisible. They don't get the same coverage. We have a win in a part of the Bay. Folks don't hear about it through the whole region. And we see this just as a incredible place, especially when we line up with the research we were just going over, for a narrative intervention. And that's really guided our campaign development. Next slide. This is bringing this together. This is our theory of change, right? If we can help more people feel hopeful about the future, we can win their support for structural change rooted in equity, whether through a regional bond measure or the many campaigns across the Bay Area for affordable housing production, preservation, tenant protections, and homelessness prevention. We have a few strategies that we've aligned on to help do that, to help bring our theory of change to life. First is that we're going to platform stories about Bay Area housing that spark feelings of courageous hope for people. Right? We see ourselves as, and by we, I really mean it begins with home campaign and everyone part of it, and hopefully you, as newsmakers and storytellers to create and share out the missing stories of hope, action, and solutions for what housing in the Bay Area can look like. We also have what we might call a passive majority. In a lot of the research that we've just seen, we know that actually a lot of folks hold really great housing justice values. They have a deep level of concern for other people in our region being able to live here. We need to figure out how we activate that. We're going to evoke collective action, and we're going to show our target audiences that people like them are working together across lines of difference already to achieve wins in the Bay Area. When we make our movement more visible too, you know, it's not always as visible as the problems, we think we can activate more folks. And that really gets to what Emily was identifying about people don't know what their personal role is. This is where we're going to help show them. We're also going to build momentum by uplifting wins. That's a really important way for us to demonstrate progress, show that change is happening across the Bay Area, and combat those feelings of hopelessness. And even in the chat earlier today, folks were celebrating some wins that are happening across our region, things people were working on for many years. We want to help bring more visibility to those wins at a constant pace. We also know we can capture people's imaginations by tapping into maybe more unexpected places to deliver our message. Things like arts, local culture, thinking about how we can create activations, experiential activations that people in our audiences come across and elicit those feelings of pride in the Bay Area and those powerful feelings of belonging and being at home. And lastly, we're going to make the connection between housing justice and related social justice movements in the Bay Area. We know that housing is a foundational issue that's connected to so many other issues: poverty, education, racism, climate change, And to galvanize our audiences, we're going to demonstrate how winning housing justice can support in winning on other social issues and vice versa. You can go to the next slide. So Emily referred to our two audiences earlier on, and just want to show a little bit how we got here. So we've identified about 500,000 registered voters across the 9-county Bay Area region who we're going to reach over the course of this next year through Begins with Home. Part of that slice, and that's in total about 15% of the registered voting population. Part of that audience is what we call our mobilized audience, or our champions. These are folks who have strong support for the idea that housing is a human right, strong support for the idea that we need to prioritize the needs of low-income households in our region, but we've modeled them as having soft support on taking action. So we know we can increase their action taking and hopefully activate them to expand our base. The other slice of our audience are our persuadables. They have a little bit softer support on some of our key values, like housing as a human right, supporting building in their neighborhood, using tax increases to improve our region, maybe softer support for renter protections. And together, we're going to focus our efforts on delivering the pathways that I just covered and the kinds of stories that highlight solutions and help people feel hopeful to these two slices of the Bay Area. And let's go to the next slide. Nope, one back. Great. Just want to give a quick visibility into some of the structures of our campaign. MPH is leading Begins with Home alongside All Home as our co-lead, and with a set of campaign partners who are working across our 9-county region on all areas of the 4 Ps: production, preservation, protection, prevention. They are our partners in our day-to-day work of spotting opportunities for new digital actions or rapid response when that is really needed, and for storytelling, identifying how we capture and share out the stories that we've been talking about. We see so many ways for allies and partners in the housing movement space, in this briefing space, to participate and help in a bunch of other ways. I'm going to pass it back to Alina to talk more about what's coming up next.
Thanks, Corey. We can just move to the next slide, because this is where we are. We're here. You are here, which is that we have launched, and that was really excited. October, moving into November, that video that we saw earlier, and really having an opportunity to start out our launch with friends and allies at the NPH conference at the beginning of the month. We debuted that poster and then began to work through our campaign partners and allies to start moving that and our website, our social media channels, and other components out into the world as we called it, I guess, our soft launch. But the campaign really comes to life in the momentum building stage. And you can see we're just right before it. We're getting ready to move into here. And that's why we were so excited to have this campaign briefing with you all, to be thinking about how we can be working together in the stage of the work. So what's happening in the momentum building stage? If we go to the next slide. This is where we are going to be really activating the storytelling and action infrastructure that we've begun to set up, and that we're going to be continuing to develop and pull from and evolve as the real world evolves around us. We will be delivering those stories and ads to the 2 target audiences that Corey was reviewing earlier, really starting with that mobilized audience, getting our champions on board, getting them part of the vision that we're showing, which is that there are people here who believe this alongside you. Come be with your peers and join in solidarity. And then moving to our persuasion targets, where we can really help them understand and digest the good news that we're showing and the opportunities for change ahead. We'll be organizing tentpole campaign moments, specific moments where we can bring large crowds and large visibility together to show our campaign key messages, and then exploring arts and cultural partnerships. Again, riffing off of what Corey said earlier, we we know that there's like a great role for our usual messaging tactics, as some of us who are here are communications professionals. Our bread and butter are our bread and butter for obvious reasons, like the digital comms and the ads are key ways to get information in front of people, but we don't want to forget about these more unusual or unexpected ways where we can capture people's attention in new ways, like when we partnered with Eastside Arts Alliance a few years ago for a music concert to really bring people together in a space of joy and art, and then also be talking about what it means to embrace housing justice in the Bay Area. We'll go to the next slide. There's a lot of ways for everybody here to be part of this work, and we are hoping you will be. We started this out saying this campaign is for all of us as we fertilize the ground to allow many policies to be more successful by making voters more receptive to the solutions that we are presenting to them. It's for all of us. It is going to take all of us, because the Bay Area is a large region, and the more partners and allies we have in this work, the more impact we can make by reaching voters and residents directly. So how can you participate? I mean, that first one, really getting to the point, is amplify. Use the materials we're providing, the messages, the toolkits, the videos, and help amplify this so that we can get more. We also really want to continue building on all of the input you've been provided as part of the Shift the Bay network over the years and into this new phase of the Begin with Home campaign. This space is going to be one place, these campaign briefings, where you can be weighing in. We have other tools and forums as well. We'll have a feedback form at the end of the session, so please hang tight for that. But we really want your input about how this space and how our campaign can best serve your ability to participate and actively engage. And then lastly, you know, if you picture that, where are we? We're just before the momentum building. So get ready. There's going to be a lot of places ahead over the next year where we're going to be inviting participation and engagement. And we want you to be thinking about what that might look like in your organization, in your particular work plan, what makes sense for your organization. There's going to be opportunities to plug in, like participating in regional moments like Weeks of Action or themed days, Affordable Housing Month during the month of May, helping identify opportunities that can bring Begins with Home messages or actions to your audiences, and then using the Begins with Home videos and stories to support your work. So those are all just a few examples of things you could get ready for. With that, we are going to move into the QA section. I saw the chat box was starting to blow up there. So we're going to be organizing those questions, but more can still come in. I am going to pass it over to Irene Rojas-Korolf, the communications director from Bay Rising, who's going to be facilitating this part. Thanks, Irene.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Alina. So keep the questions coming. I see a few people are curious about the people featured in the campaign video. You know, can we know more about them? Will they be in future storytelling? How are you using those stories?
I love this question. Yeah, shout out to St. Mary's Center. Keith and Jesse in the video are leaders in the Elder Council there. We worked with our campaign partners to put the feel out of for potential people to join that video shoot. On the timeline, we had sort of like a smattering of folks from across the Bay Area. Some housing justice advocates who work in our space. You might recognize Tamika, Cindy, Edie. I took a little turn in there, and then other folks who came to us through campaign partners who have lived experience or are advocates in their own right, working in the housing justice space. We squeezed like everything we could that shoot into that 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And we have so much more that we're actually working right now to turn into some additional videos, and especially to hear more directly from folks about their own stories and what makes them feel hopeful, what they think other people need to hear. Just in general, we ask people those questions. It's really inspiring what folks have to say, whether they're advocates, folks with lived experience, or allies in the space. And we hope to do just a lot more interviews and storytelling like that video.
Great. Thanks, Corey. And then I love this question. Someone from Rep SF was interested in, how can they do more? How can they join as a narrative partner?
It almost feels like a planted question, doesn't it? No, it's awesome. Thank you so much for this question. We'd love to find some time to reach out and chat. Our info will be up at the end. The short answer is our door is really open to everyone here and everyone in our space to figure out what are the ways that your organization, your network, your coalition can participate in the campaign. As Alina was sharing, we're looking at the calendar ahead, trying to find opportunities that will be sort of tentpole moments where everyone in our region can plan how to participate, like in a day or a week of action during Affordable Housing Month. And we'd also just love to connect directly to identify if there's specific things that we could do together. And just last, I will plug that begins with home, and our team kind of organizing, leading, coordinating this effort. We're the conduit for the stories that you have, that you create, the change you're making, the wins you're making happen on the ground. And so we want to be able to just amplify that work that you're doing. So yeah, we would love to talk more. And Alina, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that front.
I mean, just to say that this is our first campaign briefing. We are planning to have many. And as we said at the beginning, sometimes they're going to be a little bit information heavy, like our first one, as we're laying these things out. Sometimes it's going to be more collaborative, brainstorming, feedback. But we also want to hear from you, like how you want to structure these spaces by sharing what you would like to bring to these spaces. So it's kind of an in-progress thing, and we're relying on you to help us make it better.
Thank you both. So I see, Lindsay, you have your hand up.
Congratulations again on the launch of the campaign. I know it's been a long effort. So congrats. I had one comment and a question. So my comment, and I put it in the chat, but sorry, I'm Lindsay Haddix with East Bay Housing Organizations. And we just had our annual membership meeting and celebration last week. And the campaign generously gave us lots of posters to hand out at the event, which went like hotcakes. They were very popular. So I just wanted to share that there was a lot of interest in the posters, and we did have some left over, but we have them at our office, and they won't be here for long. We'll make sure that they get out to people, but it was a really popular it was really popular at the event. So thank you. And then my, I guess my question is, so, for an organization like us, we're a housing justice organization, most of our members are committed to housing justice, and that's why they join us and participate in our events. And up till now, I've kind of we've been steering people towards the the Bay Area Housing for All kind of website around the bond. And so I'm just would love some guidance about, like, should we be focusing on steering now people to the Begins with Home campaign as opposed to the Baja campaign, or both, depending on the audience? We use our best judgment. I kind of just want to make sure we're kind of following y'all's guidance about on that.
I can jump in. I mean, it's not going to be a very simple, maybe not super satisfactory, easy answer, Lindsay, but I think really to what you were getting at the end about using your best judgment is what I would have to say, because the work we're doing with Begins with Home is across production, preservation, tenant protections, homelessness prevention. It is really meant to embrace a big picture housing justice and move these messages that we have learned, we believe, are really going to fire up our base and persuade our persuadables, which means that in a way we're ahead of the game when it comes to the specific example you're talking about, the bond measure. Voters aren't going to actually be asked to do anything about that, most voters, until November 2024. So if we're talking about voters, supporters, people who are interested in understanding more, like what could I do, or what could I see, or the persuadables who need to see this vision that we're presenting about how change is possible and success is happening. I think that Begins with Home is an excellent place for them to be directed to and be introduced into our ecosystem. I think that, you know, with all sorts of policy opportunities that are going to be able to have a more receptive voter audience based on the work we're doing, we'll be dancing that delicate dance about staying in our own lanes, but our work really can serve underneath it. So I think it really is just thinking about, do you have an audience that is actually ready to work on a specific policy? If so, you know, let's get them working on that policy. Like, that's ultimately what we all want to be doing here. We're not changing hearts and minds just to do something hard. We're doing it so that we can actually make change for our communities. So I hope that helps a little bit. And I'd open it up, Corey, if you have any nuance you want to add to that.
No, that's totally right. To kind of focus on audiences for now. And hopefully what we're starting with is, yeah, really geared toward moving the public along.
Thanks. And there are a couple of related questions about kind of specific solutions and how Begins with Home relates to those. So the regional bond measure, which you've been touching on, and then also progressive taxation. So like wealth tax versus personal income or sales tax. And I think what I'm hearing is that this campaign can be a clearinghouse for all kinds of calls to action that are grounded in the 4 Ps and coming from our organizations, and then, you know, laying the groundwork in terms of narrative. So I wanted to see if you all had anything to add about that.
I think that's spot on, Irene. Begins with Home isn't a policy platform per se, right? And I'll just kind of emphasize again that I think our job is maybe less focused on like what we want people to know, and what about policy about that, and to just change how they feel. And some of that does come from helping them see that there are solutions that are really scalable, transformative solutions at our fingertips. But our job is really to soften the ground so that when people then encounter a large scale solution later on, they're ready for it. Whether they encounter it through Begins with Home and it's an action we're able to do in collaboration with our campaign partners, or it's something else that they see, so that it's having that ripple effect outward. Obviously, next year we have a lot of benchmarks that we're going to see in our region for how ready people are for transformative change, and that's how we see those other campaigns. They're benchmarks that we're holding in our timeline for how we can shift our target audiences.
Fantastic. There was a great question about how we are hoping to capture and share updates on the wins from our communities and from our organizing.
It's a great question. I hear this question and I think, oh, is this a question about our like paid media strategy and our channels? And like we could, you know, sort of start to go into some of that. But a short answer is, like, one short part of that answer is we're trying to build out some kind of narrative infrastructure that we hope to use to everyone's benefit. So that looks like right now, our Begins with Home website, social media channels, but those are channels to reach our two audiences that we shared. We'll be using our paid media budget to make sure that that our audiences are hearing that kind of continual pace of stories of solutions. Right now, we're working with the campaign partners who we showed earlier. Many of you are on the call to spot those success stories, but we also want to create a mechanism for everyone here, whether it's in future briefings or in between, to be able to let us know of a win. And obviously we're saving the chat, but can't wait to go back to read more about the win that Jordan mentioned earlier in East Palo Alto, just for spotting like what are those wins, what is the what's a really quick way we can make a snappy video that helps people see that there's momentum, that change is possible. And I think also to just kind of emphasize something we're going to be trying out is right now, sometimes those are hyper localized. But what would it be like if folks across the Bay Area know what just happened in another community, and you feel that as a sense that of increasing what's possible?
Great. Okay, we're going to take one more question. There's, and it looks like question about messaging has been addressed in the chat. Any other questions folks have? Last chance before we close out. All right.
That's great. Then we can get to our questions for you all. I'm going to take us into sort of our closing here, which is really around what's happening next, and our questions for you, which is first and foremost, we want to hear more from you, and we have a feedback form that is going to be coming in the chat box momentarily. So please take some time for that, whether you can do that right now, or whether you can make time for that later this afternoon, tomorrow morning. We would just love to hear from you while this is all fresh about how we can really be working together. Also, a quick reminder about some of the other moments that we identified earlier about ways you can plug in. If we go to the next slide. Poor Madison is dropping links in the chat box and running the slides and handling all the tech. Thank you, Madison, and a huge shout out to you behind the scenes. There are some concrete ways to plug in now. You can celebrate and share the launch of Begins with Home with the toolkit that we've put together to help elevating Begins with Home to the constituents, the voters, the residents that are in your network and sphere as well. You can amplify stories and digital actions as they go live on beginswithhome.org. As we're moving to close out launch into the momentum phase, we are putting the finishing touches on, I guess, V2 of the website. So there will be more stories and actions there to give those champions easy ways to plug in. And then you can look out for the registration link that will be coming soon for our next briefing. We're planning on digging in more on the specific campaign messaging, storytelling, and actions, but of course also want to hear from you about how you'd like to be using this space. So that last bullet really gets back to that. Our questions for you, the feedback form will be really helpful in making sure that the shared space is working for all of us. I think that wraps us up. I think we've just got one more slide that has our contact information. As Corey said, we'll be saving the chat box so we can look through that. We'll be really appreciative to review the feedback that comes in through the form. And then of course you now have our contact information as well, so you can reach out directly if you have ideas or questions or comments that you want just to get to us right away directly. Thank you so much, everybody, for spending this hour with us, and we look forward to connecting again with you soon.